what's shaking, everybody? Welcome to the Monday Overreaction Show, or the Overreaction Monday Show, whichever the case may be. I am never going to get that right. I'm Jeff Ketchum. That is Anwar Richardson. This show is brought to you by the guys over at RogueShop.com. Use that promo code OrangeBloods and go shopping. Just go to the website, find out what's right for you, what might be right for your spouse, your significant others, the loved ones in your life who might have aches and pains or maybe just want to feel good. They've got a little bit of everything for everybody, and they've been a fantastic partner with Orange Bloods for a number of years now. And we love Richard and the gang. Both Anwar and I are users of the products. We cannot endorse them enough. Anwar, welcome back. It's been a busy weekend. The Longhorns have added Isaiah Bond from Alabama. They've had other visitors come in. They're looking for a defensive line coach. Dwayne Aina is back in some special assistant role that has people. There were more page views on the Dwayne Aina hire than there were on the Isaiah Bond coming to Texas stories, which might give you a little bit of an idea of just how obsessed people might be with Dwayne Aina. I'm warning you right now, it might be very Gary Patterson-like. Where do you want to start today? Do you have a big Monday overreaction that you would like to lead off with?
No, I think when I think of everything, for me, it's more Isaiah Bond. And just, I go back to some of the shows we had last year towards the end, and when the transfer portal was about to open, saying to ourselves, like, well, there's one position we know Steve Sarkisian is going to attack. That's going to be the wide receiver position, because that seems to be his MO. And I just think that, seeing him go after the specific guys, we went from a room that you said to yourself, okay, what are you going to do? You're losing a first-round pick at receiver, probably going to lose another first-round pick at receiver. So you're losing two of those guys. You're losing Jordan Whittington. Sorry, Rodolfo, but you're losing Jordan Whittington as well. Like, what happens with that room? And a couple of weeks later, you've got the Matthew Golden that's in here. You've got Isaiah Bond. All of a sudden, you replenish, that thing where you're not going into saying who the hell is going to catch the ball. Now you look at that, potentially Jonte Cook. Just the attacking, I think, of Sark in the transfer portal is probably been the most impressive thing for me. That's probably where I would like to start.
I think it's interesting that I think Steve Sarkisian took a pretty big risk that has paid off for him, because I think I've got a scorching hot take that I'll give you in a second. But when the portal first opened up and the Juice Wells of the world, the kid out of Purdue that's at Oklahoma right now, Burks, there were a number of guys, and they were all linked to Texas. And the word I had always got was that, we're kicking the tires on these guys, but Sark doesn't love any of them. And Sark's waiting for his Moby Dick. And Matthew Golden hits the portal, and he was a guy that Texas immediately wanted. They were like, yeah, that'll be guy number 2. But we need a primary wide receiver 1. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and there were whispers of Isaiah Bond from Alabama. There were whispers of Kentucky's Barry Brown, who just will forever be whispered as a potential portal guy until he's in the NFL. And it looked like Texas, because they had waited, perhaps was just not going to come away with ultimately the target that they wanted. But then Nick Saban retires. Isaiah Bond does the thing that he had been flirting with doing a couple of weeks prior, really leading up until the deadline to either get in or get out. I think January 4th was the deadline to get in if you were going to transfer within the SEC. And as soon as Isaiah Bond hit the portal, Steve Sarkisian's on a plane to Atlanta. He's meeting in Georgia with Bond and I guess his family. They have Bond in this weekend. They got that thing done fast. And after all of the patience, and after it looking like Sarkisian might not quite end up with the difference-making wide receiver 1 proven big game player, all of the things that I think he was getting from Adonai Mitchell in transferring from Georgia to Texas a year ago. He gets it with Bond, and it was a real show of patience because there was a point last week on War where it just looked like they weren't going to get that guy. It took a very serendipitous turn of events for this situation to unfold. But now that it's unfolded, you can see where Steve Sarkisian now has the offense almost exactly where he wants it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he's not settling in the portal. That's for sure. Like, they're not just grabbing who's available. And to your point, all those guys were available. All those guys would have probably come to Texas, and Texas is really after them. And at the end of the day, he went after the guys. Like, he's going after the guys that he feels like could come in and be difference makers. And again, we talked about this before. It's a total change of where he once was a few years ago, where I think he was just bringing in guys and just saying, okay, maybe that guy can fill a spot on the roster. Now he's saying, no, I'm going to bring in guys who can probably start for me, and I don't necessarily just need to bring in a guy who's just here. So for the most part, when he's starting over the last couple of years, he's bringing in guys who come in and have the ability to start, whether it's like a Ryan Watts that he was able to bring in. Maybe it was a Jalen Catalog, a guy that, they brought in through the portal. Like there's a list of guys, that you can go through. And I said, I'm really saying over like the past couple of years, more so than anything else, that's what you're seeing from him. And so to this person, like I know Bond was a person that the name I was hearing, in the playoffs, that could be a guy, but no one knew what he was going to do. Was he going to go in the portal? Is he not going to go in portal? But, at the end of the day, he plucks the guy out. Like you said, all the things that happened, I wasn't here so to see I was only able to, catch up on and see things here or there. I guess him at the car dealership probably doesn't hurt at all. I guess that was kind of like the first kind of big clue at the Lamborghini dealership. I think it was a photo that you had, but at the end of the day, I think Sark and his staff, kudos, they're very calculated in what they're doing. They seem to have a really good grasp of it. Don't seem to be getting lost in the sauce with any of the guys that they're going after. And then you bring in a guy, like you said, it's hard to say these are the next 1-2 punch, but it sure beats the alternative, which was saying, man, when I spoke to Chris Jackson, he had Matthew Golden, and at the time he was like, okay, well, everyone's got to lean on him because outside of that, I don't got a guy on this roster who's got more than 8 catches, and that guy was Jonte Cook. Now all of a sudden you've got your 1-2 that's in there, and then it'd be interesting to see what happens with the other guys in the room. But welcome to big boy football. This is what it looks like. This to me, Catch, when you want to be the Alabamas of the world and you want to be the Georgias of the world. Well, you acquire talent, you lose talent, you acquire talent, you lose talent. Like it's a revolving door, but good teams, find a way to replenish and they keep it going.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. It's funny when we talk about the portal, really every position tells a different story because we know they're looking for defensive linemen. We know that they bring in Kendrick Blackshire this weekend from Alabama as a potential depth guy at linebacker. Maybe not an automatic starter, but certainly a guy that I think would compete at that position. Maybe Gavin Holmes-ish, Jalen Cattle, although Gavin Holmes was a 2-year starter at Wake Forest, so maybe that's not fair. But a guy that, I don't know as an automatic starter. They're looking in the secondary for another piece. We know that they went in home with Jabbar Muhammad from Washington this weekend. So there's a bunch of different stories with regards to what they're trying to do. I think they're going to try to hold out as long as possible. They definitely want the impact guys, if at all possible. For instance, they bring in Kendrick Blackshire this weekend, and yet Arizona loses its head coach. Its roster now is completely wide open for poaching if you can pull it off. Arizona had a first-team All-Pac-12 linebacker this year who's only a sophomore, who certainly has a relationship with the new Texas linebackers coach and co-defensive coordinator. Will Johnny Nansen be a target for Arizona as its head coach. There's a lot of like balls in the air right now that are being juggled. We know that they're looking for things, but as it relates to the wide receiver position, I'll give you my hot take. I think if he stays healthy, I think Isaiah Bond will have the single biggest year receiving of any of the receivers that Texas has had since Steve Sarkisian's been on campus. I was thinking about this earlier today on War. Like when I think of Xavier Worthy, it's like buying a sports car and only being able to drive it around in the neighborhood. I don't know that Xavier, and I think at the end of the year, you started to see better chemistry between him and Quinn Ewers, but it was as if you legitimately gave Quinn Ewers a Lambo as his first car and said, okay, go out there and drive it. Have fun. It's not always as easy as that with cars like that, using the sports car metaphor. I think Xavier Worthy was sometimes a tough guy to get a connection with. I think when you look at Adonai Mitchell, from a playing style standpoint, one of the things that got pointed out before the playoff game and talking to Washington people is that, if you think about it, Adonai Mitchell wasn't a big yards after the catch guy. I think he only had about 147 on the season after the catch. So that wasn't his strength as a player. I think what Isaiah Bond brings to the table is a blend of both Xavier Worthy's breakaway game-breaking speed. I think he fights for the ball and is a little bit of a junkyard dog in the way that an Adonai Mitchell can sometimes be. I think he's going to be, before it's all said and done, I think he's got it. I think he's got a chance to have 70, 80 catches, 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns or so. I think he's got a chance to put up monster numbers next year because I think he's a car that's a little bit easier to drive for Quinn Ewers. I think he's a guy that's easier to connect with. I think he will work harder potentially. He will come back for the ball. He makes in-air adjustments that maybe Xavier Worthy wasn't able to provide and still learning to do. I don't think that Isaiah Bond is necessarily better than Xavier Worthy or Adonai Mitchell. I just think that next year his production might have a chance to surpass both of them.
It's interesting. I mean, look, at the end of the day, did Xavier go over 1,000 yards this past year?
He did in the bowl game.
Yeah, okay. So we're including the bowl. He finally got over 1,000. So, which it's a crazy stat to think of when it's all said and done. But yeah, I can see some of the things that you're pointing out as relates to it. I definitely think the good part is it won't be a drop off. You can probably only go up from there. They could be equal at best. But like you said, there could be a little bit more things as far as fighting for 50-50 balls and some of the other things that you would want. But I definitely think as relates to Isaiah Bond, it helps that he has a quarterback that will help, get him the ball. I think that ends up being one of the things that led into his decision, during his conversation with Pete Thamel. I think that was one of the quotes that he had, was that going to playing with Quinn Ewers was one of the big things. He was a big-time pocket passer. He's going to be a top pick in the draft. And so he thought it was going to be a good duo. So he knows that he's got the quarterback that will be able to get him the ball. And I can definitely see, the thing about Quinn is, we've seen what he's able to do when he does, especially when he's on his A game and he's got his guys clicking on all cylinders. And I think what helps with a guy like Bond, it kind of becomes like an Adonai, I think, from a mentality standpoint, which is, man, I just want to come in here, ball out, go get paid. And those kind of guys are kind of junkyard dogs because the things that they're thinking about and their motivations are pretty similar. And so, yeah, I can definitely see Bond having a pretty damn, good year. And I can see both of those guys having very good years, Matthew Golden as well. And I can also see, when it's all said and done, Quinn Ewers being a guy that we're talking about competing for some big time personal trophies in December.
Well, and I think the Ewers piece of this is the elephant in the room with Bond. He was a frustrated player at times last year at Alabama because Jalen Milroe isn't the easiest quarterback as a receiver to play with. It's not like within that all. I think if you swapped out Isaiah Bond with Xavier Worthy on the two teams this year, Worthy's numbers at Alabama, if he plays there, might be pretty similar. The one thing Jalen Milroe can really do is he finds guys on the go route. I mean, he really knows how to connect on the deep ball. I think Bond would have had a huge year. I think when you look at his numbers at Alabama, and now you think about him with a quarterback that can get him the ball in every way possible, it's just a little bit of a different deal. No disrespect to Jalen Milroe, who I think is a fantastic player, but in terms of throwing the football, Bond is going from a guy that's still project-y a little bit to a guy in Quinn Ewers that if he has the season that you're talking about him having in 2024 potentially, he's going to be a first-round draft pick. And I think Isaiah Bond's going to be a first-round draft pick if he has the type of year that I'm talking about. I mean, the thing is, from a speed standpoint, you're talking about a guy that's a 10,400 meters. I think his best in the 200 meters is 2105. But he's a state champion track guy who's a football player. He's a football player who plays track and not the other way around, or runs track, I should say. So I think I think of all of the additions that the Longhorns have made through the portal so far, for me, Isaiah Bond is easily the most impactful if he can stay healthy over the course of 12, 13, 14 games.
But before you go for that, the thing that he told Thamel that I thought was really interesting as relates to the thing that you're talking about is he said Quinn Ewers, he called this, I'm looking it up here. He said he's a great big time pocket passer quarterback. You know what that means? I ain't got to worry about a guy not making reads and just going to haul ass because he's panicking. He's like, well, I can just make plays with my feet. He literally says, I like him because he is a pocket passer, AKA he's looking to make throws down the field as opposed to just saying like one read and then I'm out, right? I think that's the thing that becomes the appeal to him. Him using that specific word, pocket passer, was the signal for me, the bell that's like, oh yeah, so you don't like that dude who's just running at all times and not staying in the pocket because you went and looked at the film and realized he was open, but he didn't see it.
Yeah, no, it'll be different. Quinn will have, those two guys will have to work out some chemistry, but he and Adonai Mitchell didn't really have a problem in doing that a year ago. And I think that I think Isaiah Bond wakes up this morning and now he realizes, man, I can do everything in the route tree. Because I think he was somewhat limited at Alabama a year ago. If you watch his highlight tapes, it's a whole lot of like Milroe just chunking it far. And look, to Bond's credit, he's a viable deep playmaker. But I think he's a guy that thinks of himself as a much more well-rounded wide receiver that maybe wasn't used as well as he could be had he had a quarterback that's a pure drop back, stay in the pocket, get rid of the ball, get it to your receivers type of guy. So look, I think Bond's going to be a home run for Texas. And again, I can't stress it enough. Sarkisian's on a little bit of a heater right now in the sense that even when he takes chances and they don't work out, they are still finding a way to work out. You talk about, they haven't extended yet and taken bodies. We know they need bodies at defensive tackle. They could probably use a body or two at linebacker. They need a body at tight end, and yet they're still looking for difference makers. And maybe it was the Alabama thing has just set off a chain reaction where the portal closes for everybody. But now it's open for 30 days for Alabama players. You're going to continue to see more of those players enter the portal, I think, in the coming week. You've now got a Washington roster that's got a portal open for 30 days. We've seen Jabbar Muhammad go in and the Longhorns interested there. Now that the Arizona roster is open. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get the job. And we'll talk about the Texas coaching thing here in just a second. They're still looking for a defensive line coach. The departure of Bo Davis has had an impact in a couple of different areas. They're still looking for the big-time guys. And, if Jim Harbaugh leaves to go to the NFL, suddenly the Michigan roster is open. Whoever it is that replaces Harbaugh at Michigan, if he's a head coach at another school, suddenly his roster. So this Saban thing has really triggered a chain reaction of rosters being opened that are allowing for portal shopping that didn't quite look like would be available a week ago at this time. Onward, let's move on to Bo Davis and the defensive line coach. The position still needs to be filled. They lose Jamari Caldwell to Oregon, largely because Bo Davis leaves to go to LSU. Now we talk to defensive tackles. Alex January from Duncanville moved to Austin yesterday, so he's good. But even people close to him admitted that had this happened a couple of weeks ago, they would have given very serious considerations to going elsewhere. Deantre Robinson.
But what I heard was touch and go for a few days over the weekend before he was, after Bo left, before he decided, he said, okay, I'm good. I'm good.
I mean, they definitely thought about it. And you got the sense that if they had even more time to think about it, who knows what would have happened. Deantre Robinson hasn't yet formally asked out of his letter of intent, but he didn't show up in Austin yesterday. He's a midterm guy. There's a sense that in the next day or two, he'll ask out of his letter of intent and potentially stay closer to home, being from the state of Florida. Defensive tackle, already a position where they do need bodies. They also need bodies that can play. The one thing they can't really afford is for the best players in this recruiting class at the defensive tackle position to not show up. So it feels like the one thing Steve Sarkisian, if he can do with some urgency, is hire a defensive line coach to stabilize what they have, to aid them in their future pursuit of defensive linemen. And yet it hasn't happened. It makes me think that there could be an NFL guy in play. I mean, if it was a college guy, they might even be able to have that position filled. There were, thoughts that Freddie Roach from Alabama might be an obvious candidate because he develops and recruits like a mother. And yet it looks like he's going to be one of only about 2 coaches from Saban's staff that will stay on the new Alabama staff under Kalen DeBoer. Your vibe on where things stand right now with the defensive line coaching job? I think some of the names that have been bandied about are names that if they were going to be the guys, they could have already been the guy. So for a hire not to be announced at this point makes me wonder why. And there are some reasons why. Again, it could be that the guy's still in the NFL. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the example of that would be Chris Jackson from last year, right? Yeah. I mean, you lose Brendan Marion. He goes over to UNLV, and you're playing this waiting game, trying to understand what's going on, and then all of a sudden, then Chris Jackson happens, right? So if it's an NFL guy, then that's the model that you look for and say, okay, that would make sense from a timing aspect because, to your point, he could bring someone in, at this moment. So he may be having his eye on somebody, it maybe not wanting to do a whole lot of kicking the tires or waiting for that thing to get done. I know, we've heard a couple different names, but that we're able to, like the Atlanta guy, like it doesn't seem like that guy's kind of in play. But yeah, it's the interesting part, honestly, is it seemed like the knock on Bo Davis was kind of like a recruiting standpoint where people felt like he could have done a little bit better. And now that's the thing that people are freaking out, like, oh my God, we're losing these recruits because of Bo Davis. I'm a little confused at the moment, but those things did happen. So,
Bo Davis wasn't a good recruiter at Texas. It's just that the guys he landed did like him. But I mean, we're not talking about 5-star guys here. And if you look at Bo Davis's history at Texas while he was here, there hasn't been a single guy that he's recruited that's played at all. And one of the reasons why they think they've got to go out in the portal and find some defensive tackles is because the guys that he recruited that have been on campus, they're not convinced that those guys can play. So the important thing is that Sark gets it right. There is an immediate deal where it's like, man, they're already kind of low on numbers and don't have to Deantre Robinson's credit. He's probably the best of the bunch that they landed in recruiting this year. Might even be the best that Bo Davis landed during his time at Texas. But it's kind of, Bo Davis was okay. But I think the thing that you notice when you start talking about Alex January gets cold feet, Melvin Hills is going to take some time and think about what he wants to do. Obviously, Deantre Robinson. It speaks to the relationship that these guys have with their position coaches when they're recruited. And when those guys leave, you'd like to think that these guys are making decisions beyond who their assistant coaches are going to be. But sometimes that assistant coach really does matter. It'll be interesting to see how much longer it takes to close this off. Getting January on campus helps. If you're going to lose Robinson, you're going to lose Robinson. And I think at that point, everything's kind of stabilized until there's not much else that can happen, I suppose. You couldn't – Caldwell – the thing is with Caldwell, he just doesn't know who his guy would be. So he – in needing to make a decision last week, wasn't willing to commit to Texas sight unseen with regards to who his coach would be. Sometimes this stuff happens. And I think, it will be fascinating to see what Texas is able to do from a defensive tackle acquisition standpoint coming out of this. I know at Arizona that Johnny Nansen had a big old nose guard that's got 1 year of eligibility left. And he's kind of a Johnny Nansen guy. I almost would be shocked. His name is Bill Norton, 6'6", 325, was one of the better nose tackles in the Pac-12 a year ago. Not all Pac-12 or anything like that, but Nansen loves him. And approximately 3.5 weeks ago, one of the things he said about Norton was, quote, he better come back. He doesn't have a choice. This was when he was still the defensive coordinator at Arizona. If the Arizona roster is going to be open, I think Bill Norton as a potential defensive tackle is a guy that you can see Texas go after. Although maybe Texas will have to survive Johnny Nansen being a candidate to be the new Arizona head coach. I know that a lot of the Polynesian players on the Arizona roster were getting higher Nansen going as a hashtag on Twitter yesterday. So there is some thought that internally he's a guy that some of the players would be pushing for. And then a couple of people have mentioned it in the Specs chat, but Jacob Manu was the first team all Pac-12 linebacker that Nansen specifically coached a year ago. I think that if Manu ends up being a guy that has an eye on the portal after all this shakeup at Arizona, I would be shocked if he didn't look at Texas, if Nansen didn't make a pitch for him. And if we're talking about linebackers that Texas could potentially get through the portal that could make an immediate impact and be truly plus players, there aren't many of them out there, but potentially Jacob Manu could be one of them.
So when I look at the scholarship board that you had, right, and I give you the names Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, Zach Swanson, Aaron Bryant, Sadir Mitchell, Alex January, and Deantre Robinson, the word or phrase that comes to mind is what?
Okay. The thing is, Alfred Collins is going to be your lead dog next year as it currently stands. That's not a role that he's shouldered much in his career, but he's coming back for exactly this opportunity. Vernon Broughton's just been kind of a guy. And then you get into that next tier of Swanson and Bryant, Sydir Mitchell. Man, I think you're kind of lucky if one of those guys really elevates their play and becomes a plus player for this defense. The defensive tackle position before Bo Davis left was going to be the question mark about this team, I think, going into the 2024 season. Ironic, right? Given that what they've just had in the past year. One way or the other, they're going to have to bring in some bodies. I heard of a name over the weekend that I don't have permission to talk about yet, but it would be a potential spring transfer from a Power 5 program. The guy's a starter at a Power 5 program, but I don't even know how to necessarily compare him to the guys that they have on campus other than to say he's played, he's started. That's outside of Alfred Collins. That's kind of more than what they have. And again, I think when you look at what Bo Davis did as a recruiter, Texas is in this position because Bo Davis failed in that respect. The Swanson and Aaron Bryant can't be the best of 3 years worth of recruiting if you're Bo Davis, and yet that's what really exists. And quite frankly, everybody on the team should send Tom Herman like a bowl ring or something, because they've gotten by on the last 3 seasons entirely on Tom Herman scouting and not developing, but recruiting. I mean, it was Herman that brought in Tavondre Sweat, Herman that brought in Byron Murphy, Herman that brought in Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, and you can go on down the list, go back to last year where it was Maro Ajomo and Keandre Coburn. We've been talking for years about the recruiting at the interior defensive line position needs to get better. It really didn't. The thing is, even if Deantre Robinson were to show up this year, you mentioned him and Alex January and Melvin Hills. Like, I don't know how much to expect from them from a first-year impact standpoint. A little bit like the other guys. Maybe if you got one of those guys to step in and be a first-year guy that plays, maybe gets 20, 25% of the snaps. So we're talking about maybe 200 snaps. That's how many Trill Carter had. They also have to replace Trill Carter. And at the end of the day, Trill Carter played 25% of the snaps on defense last year, which translated to about 200 game snaps. All of those things need to be replaced. I think you're probably going to see those numbers eventually replaced by some people that come through the portal. But I mean, it's a position that's very unsettled going into the spring. And what's your word for that position group or phrase?
Underwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, like there's, I don't know which, Alfred Collins would be the guy. Really, once you get past Collins and Broughton, and again, I don't know what that looks like in a full-time position for either one of those two. But I can't sit here and say, oh my gosh, like I think Collins picks up where Sweat left off or something. Like, what Sweat did was pretty damn amazing. And that what he did was put together a season that will have you at least considering him on day one, if not day two, right? I don't know if Collins makes that kind of jump. You would love for him to make that kind of jump, but I can sit here and boldly proclaim that. Maybe we'll see what happens as the offseason goes along. Broughton has been good, but outside of that, good. How about this? At times, can I give you a disclaimer? Can I add in?
I'll go with that.
I'll give you a qualifier. At times, I've heard his name.
At times, in parentheses.
Yes, at times. But outside of that, I've just got a bunch of guys. I don't. When we go into the off season and we start talking to ourselves and say, okay, well, what's the room that you're most concerned about? That's going to be the room that we're concerned about. They need somebody, Catch, I think, to everything that you're saying, Like, they need the Kyle Flood equivalent on the defensive line. Like that's exactly what, because you talked about it. The offensive line is kind of the same kind of conversations that we've had for years, right? And then Kyle Flood has been able to come in there and solidify that thing, get that thing going to really catch. We don't even hear about Texas kicking the tires on anybody offensive line wise in the portal. Out of anything you hear, you never hear. Hey, there's a Bama offensive lineman that's going to go. Like, there's a Georgia offensive lineman that's in the portal. You never hear them talk about offensive line. Like,
even when they needed offensive linemen to come in,
they're like, nah, we're good. And they usually, and they've been good. Like, you scored and said, okay, that's what they need on the defensive line perspective. They need the Kyle Flood equivalent of a guy who can, one, get the most out of the talent, but two, recruit and bring in elite guys. I think that becomes the thing to make sure you're getting all the talent in the world. So yeah, underwhelming is what I look at, and you know, whoever they bring in, they have a tall task at hand.
Yeah, if you look at Deantre Robinson as potentially a sunken cost, that he's not on campus, he's not planning on coming on campus. It looks like he's going to ask out of his letter of intent. Okay, well now, and January's on campus, so you couldn't lose both those guys. But if one's going to be gone and one's on campus, okay. Well, if you're Sarkisian now, you can be a little bit patient. That he could bring in somebody today, and it might not change Robinson's mind, and Caldwell's already gone. So, the timing of this was just awful for Sarkisian, because LSU had been coveting Bo Davis for a while. If Bo Davis leaves after the bowl game, well, look, that was 2 weeks ago today, right? Mm-hmm. So he would have had a week and a half more time to potentially get that job in place. And who knows, his guy still might not have been able to be announced, depending on who his guy is and where it is. But, for Bo to wait and to do it last week really put Sarkisian in a pinch. It really hasn't allowed him enough time to get a guy in place to hold on to Deantre Robinson. And, I think from what I heard, Jamari Caldwell went flat dark on Texas the moment Bo Davis left. That they weren't able to get him on the phone, that they weren't quite sure suddenly what was even happening with him. And I remember when I heard that, it was like, oh, Caldwell's not calling him back. Sometimes you don't need words to get the sign that you need about the direction of a recruitment like that. And I would say, I think it was about 12 hours after I heard, we just haven't heard from him, we don't know what's going on there, I was like, yeah, you do. You just don't want to say it out loud, but
like in this business, sometimes no comment is the comment.
Yes.
Like I've always used the analogy, like if you ever go and say, hey, excuse me, you've been accused of being a pedophile. What do you have to say to that? No comment. Like, no, that's the time you comment, right? That's the time you speak up. Like, that's not a no comment kind of thing. Sometimes no comment is the comment.
Well, and look, so I talked about Arizona linebacker Jacob Anu yesterday. He comes out of, so apparently the Arizona coach, who's now the new Washington coach, he met him face to face. And apparently the meeting lasted less than 3 minutes. And apparently a bunch of the players were pissed. There were reporters waiting for the players to come out, which I thought was kind of cold-blooded. But look, hey, I'm not going to bash on the media. We'd have probably been doing the same thing had this happened at Texas. So players are coming out, and one of the questions to Jacob Anu was like, hey, it seems like there's a lot of discontent. Players aren't real happy with what happened. Can you give a comment? No comment. And it was like, oh, okay. Like you said, sometimes no comment ends up being a hell of a comment. They're asking him, is everything okay? How do you feel? Sounded like there were some hard feelings. And he says no comment. And again,
That's your comment.
That's your comment.
That's all you need to know.
And sometimes 2 words can say 1,000 words.
By the way, I'm trying to imagine a world where we're on campus and John Bianco finds out that we're just trying to talk to people after meetings. You talk about a head exploding. Bianco's head would explode if you said it. Yeah, when you said we probably would do that, I'm like, nobody wants to deal with those emails and those text messages and threats of bans and credentials being lifted. And we're just on campus trying to interview guys.
The thing is, it's something like that has never happened to Texas before. I mean, if you go back to all of the coaches that they've had successful coaches, but none that ever left to take other jobs, and they fired coaches. What Texas has never gone through is a situation where its head coach calls a players meeting to tell them, hey, yo, guys, I know I talked to you in your living room and told you and your parents a bunch of things, but look, man, I got to bounce. And I hope one day you guys understand where I'm coming from. They've never quite had that. So you're probably right. But I also think that would maybe be one of those situations where even the Texas SID office would be kind of caught off guard by whatever, you know what I mean? There's no plan for that. I was surprised to see the videos of so many. Let me put it to you like this. There wasn't an Arizona player that was accosted by the media yesterday and asked for a comment who had anything nice to say. Not one. And they were on social media last night putting their former coach on blast because, again, the meeting lasted 3 minutes. It sounds like old boy looked him in the eye and said, I'm out, and not much more than that, which, look, it's a dirty business, man. Everybody's looking out for number one. And too many times fans and the media point to the players and decide that the players should be more grown up and responsible with their reactions to things than the actual head coaches who are paid millions of dollars. But whether it was Kalen DeBoer or the cat that just left Arizona, like all these things are tricky. And the guys that kind of get shit on and left in a position where they got to scramble and figure out something for themselves are the unpaid workforce. It is it's a tricky situation in all of these deals. And look, I'm telling you right now, as soon as the Arizona guy takes the Washington job, I'm scouring the Arizona depth chart at all of the positions that I know Texas needs help at. And look, I got to believe that personnel guys at every major program in the country were probably doing the same thing. Hey, the portal's pretty light now, but we still need this or we still need that. Which of these schools has players that we would have an interest in? And I would imagine that half the roster at Arizona right now has been contacted behind the scenes by somebody letting them know we have a real interest should you enter the portal. It'll be one of the things I think we watch in the coming days. Who still leaves Alabama? Who leaves Washington? Who leaves Arizona? And will we continue to see spots open up? Michigan is, I think, the most obvious high-profile spot that could change in the next week or so. Will Harbaugh make a decision quick enough that will allow potentially his Michigan players to leave this spring if they want to? Or will it take enough time that there's not enough time for a lot of these guys to make moves before that April 15th through the end of the month of April window that opens up?
Yeah, I don't know. By the way, to the defense of the Arizona players, he did leave for like a team that was kind of a rival of theirs that they did lose to this year. Like, you would be a little pissy, in that regard. I get it. Like, and that was a conference team. That's a conference rival team you probably hated, and it got a lot of attention. Like, that probably was a kick in the nuts for those guys. Like, that, if he had left and went to somewhere like Michigan or something to that effect, those guys would be like, okay, good luck to you. Not for a team, and it wasn't like leaving for Arizona State because that would be a joke. But leaving for that program that you were battling against, that probably was a kick in the nuts to them. The Harbaugh thing is interesting because obviously we know NFL team like Jim Harbaugh ain't dumb. Jim Harbaugh is gonna get a raise. Like Jim Harbaugh is gonna play this thing out, whether it's from Michigan or whether it's going into the NFL. Jim Harbaugh, you and I have talked about this before. Just a few years ago, people forget that was a guy that was they thought about firing at Michigan to the point they took away some of his salary because that's how upset they were with that dude, right? So it's hilarious to me this season, Catch, when I watch them and they act like, you know, he is like the second coming, like he is their Lord and Savior. And I'm like, you guys wanted that guy fired just a few years ago. And I think Jim knows. He's like, listen, man, after this year, like I'm sitting on the catbird seat. I'm getting paid. I'm getting guaranteed money. Like whatever money I gave back, I'm getting that and some. And so if he's smart, I mean, he just waits to see what happens. But, you know, there's going to be a lot of there may be openings. See what jobs come open in the NFL, what jobs that you might be interested in that you could potentially angle for, and then go from there. But at worst, you're getting a raise from Michigan at the very worst.
Yeah, well, he's had that contract on his desk to be signed for a while now, and it remains unsigned. That'll be a situation to keep an eye on. It's funny, on where I was looking at your tweet from right before we came on the air. Saban retires, Bo Davis leaves, Quinn Ewers returns, Johnny Barron returns, Steve Sarkisian gets an extension, Dwayne Aina returns, and Isaiah Bond joins Texas. We've talked about most of these things in the final 10 to 15 minutes of today's Overreaction Monday show. By the way, guys, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, do all those things for us if you haven't already done so. We do appreciate them. Is there a topic that you want to hit on before?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, we expected Quinn to return, so I don't think there's much meat left on that bone. Jade, you know, is not a huge surprise as well. There's two things I would like to touch on, actually. The Sarkisian extension, we could talk. I know you guys have talked about that. I didn't have a chance to talk about that much as well. And then the Aina thing. I've got to get my perspective from you on that one. And I only want to do Steve real quick, and I want to maybe close with Aina. Your thoughts, because I read your 10 thoughts from the weekend. I didn't get your thoughts though. I don't know if you had something on Sark, or maybe I missed it, or maybe just wrote about it previously. I just wanted to get your thoughts on Sark getting the extension.
Perfect timing for Sarkisian. I mean, Saban leaves, and a guy who was already in the middle of contract negotiations for an extension suddenly has even more leverage than he already had. We haven't yet seen terms of the deal. We just know that it's a 4-year extension. I think a month ago, 2 months ago, they would have thought about, well, there's 3 years left on the deal. Let's just give him 2 more years, or give him at most 3 more years. I think the timing of Saban leaving and the fact that suddenly Jimmy Sexton was able to hold Texas's feet to the fire a little bit. I mean, he got Mike Norvell 8 years, $10 million a pop. The Longhorns don't quite have to go that far out, but now they're committed to Steve Sarkisian for 7 years moving forward. He's almost certainly going to make at least as much money as Mike Norvell. There's no way Jimmy Sexton came out of those contract negotiations with Texas paying less money than Mike Norvell got at Florida State. So it was an incredible little fortuitous bounce for Sarkisian. And now, like, Texas and Sarkisian are married. They are, the way I mentioned it on the show the other day is, Onward, the moment I had twins and we brought the twins home, and it dawned on, like, it really sunk in, like, man, I ain't ever going to sleep again. And two at the same time. The joke that Heather and I used to make all the time was that neither one of us is ever getting rid of the other one because we're that committed to each other. I think that's what Texas and Sarkisian are now. He doesn't have the Jimbo contract, but he's going to have 7 years, $10+ million a year on that deal. And I think unless Steve Sarkisian ever takes a job in the NFL, he and Texas are married. That is, they are ride or die together. He's essentially turned down Alabama. So what the hell else could even come up in the college game?
Nothing.
So now it's like, do the Dallas Cowboys ever come calling in 4 or 5 years? I don't know. I don't know what the NFL thinks of Steve Sarkisian, but I think we're talking about a guy right now that's going to be with Texas for the rest of the decade, and they're more married today than they've ever been married before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that was bound to happen, and I think what you said is the great point is, and by the way, the inklings that I got, and I think you did as well last week, was Texas wasn't really worried about him going to Bama. They really felt like, look, this is going to be the job. This is the job that he wants. And really, at the bit all said and done, you don't want to be the guy that follows Nick Saban. Like, you don't want to be the guy that tries to live up to that standard, because anything you're almost in a can't win situation, because if you have to go through a quote unquote rebuild, Alabama fans are going to lose their crap over that, right? And so, and if you win and get to the SEC title game or get to the playoffs, I mean, like, that's kind of going to be a shoulder shrug as far as accomplishments are concerned. No, you don't want to be the guy that replaces the legend. You want to be the guy that replaced the guy who had to replace the legend. And that's kind of where that is. So Sark being here at Texas, to me, Catch, just to borrow the Saban thing, Saban, people forget Saban was pretty much a failure in the NFL. But in college, he was a god. I mean, he ends up being the GOAT when it was all said and done. And we've seen a lot of college coaches go to the NFL and not have that kind of success, and really college is their home. I think this is Sark's home. Like, I think this is where he's comfortable. I think this is his sweet spot. I think this is where he feels the best. I think, he's got the power, he's got the control. You don't have to worry about some of those things become a little bit more problematic in the NFL when your GM is dictating things to you, salary caps, all that kind of stuff. So I think this is where his sweet spot is. And I think this is where he'll have the most success as a coach. And really, that's where he's had the most success coaching, has always been in college and not necessarily the NFL. So I think this is a move for him. The last thing I want to go, but the Akina thing. There's certain people that have this folklore prior to my arrival that coaches that they love. And I think no matter whatever Gary Patterson was like for Texas fans, I feel like I've heard Akina's name years before Patterson was ever available as almost like I don't want to say godlike, because I don't want to be like, crazy, but this on this highest level of highest levels that could ever be. And people
like Mr. Miyagi as a defensive back coach.
Yes, like the guy, but on a folklore level, he invented DBs. I'm fascinated if there was pressure on the Texas staff with Gary Patterson as an analyst. This is that times what with Akina as an analyst.
I don't think it's as bad as that, for the simple reason that Dwayne Akina is 67 going on 68 years old. He'll be 68 in the fall. So his days of coaching on the field as a position coach, I mean, at 68 years old, I just don't know that Dwayne Aina wants to be on the road recruiting. Like, I think he's now, as an analyst, this is his sweet spot until he just decides to retire. But I think the thing that's going to be similar is that there will be that's the reality. That doesn't mean that Texas fans have to live in that reality. And if there are any struggles at all, you're going to hear the rabble, Dwayne Aina, rabble. Like that, that'll be a thing. I think even more potentially alarming than that is that if the secondary has any success at all in 2024, people will do the thing that they did with Gary Patterson, which Dwayne Aina won't be on the field. There are things as an analyst that he can do. Sorry, I got the hiccups. That will be very important to the Texas program. We'll be working on game plans and player evaluations and things like that. But he's not going to be on the field coaching the players. If Malik Muhammad emerges into an All-American, there will be people who want to give Dwayne Aina the credit the way when the defense started playing better in 2022, it was like the Gary Patterson effect. And it was like, sometimes you can get these guys in these analysts off-field roles, and they have such big names and big personalities that they'll get all of the glory if there is any glory to be had. And then if there's anything bad that goes wrong, they won't get any blame. Instead, there will be a clamoring for that person to replace the person that is perceived to be failing. So I think for a Terry Joseph and a Blake Gideon, I think it does make their jobs a little harder just because there's a little bit more outside noise. But those guys got to get better results out of the secondary or they won't be back anyway. Like at some point, Steve Sarkisian is going to start demanding that the 5 stars and the guys that they have in the secondary are getting better year on end. And, I don't know that this past year, we didn't really see Terrence Brooks make a big move. Other than Malik Muhammad, it's hard to point to any of the guys in the secondary from 2023. Johnny Barron's a perfect example. He's coming back in 2024 because he didn't have the season in 2023 that he thought he was going to. Johnny Barron was talking about winning the Thorpe Award this year before the season. You and I got closer to winning the Thorpe Award. Like he had a very solid year, but he wasn't that kind of a guy. And I think you look across the secondary, Jaron Thompson didn't make a noticeable jump. Ryan Watts didn't make a noticeable jump. Keaton Crawford. I mean, you name them. You can go through all of the names. This is a position group that needs to take a step forward this year. And I think that there's some pressure on Terry Joseph and Blake Gideon to make that happen. If you keep going multiple seasons in a row and your position group isn't making really significant progress with the talent that they have at their disposal, I think there will be some pressure on those guys. So Dwayne Aina accentuates that a little bit. But unlike Gary Patterson, who, if Sarkisian had said after year 2 of Kwiatkowski, I want to make a change and Gary Patterson is my guy, that would have made a lot of sense. Dwayne Aina in a position coach role at 68, going on 69 next year. Like I can't imagine that ever being a thing, that Dwayne Aina would ever go back to being a position coach. Certainly at a school like Texas, where the requirements in recruiting are you better hit the road, you better work your ass off, you better go all over the country. I don't know that Dwayne Aina is in it for that anymore.
Do you think any of the players know who Dwayne Aina is?
Nah.
That's also my thought process too, as far as like quote unquote impact and stuff that's concerned. Like we're older, so like we can remember like Aina the same way everyone can remember Vince. But I'm like, these guys these kids probably don't know who he is though.
Malik Muhammad was like 8 the last time Dwayne Aina was in Austin. So now what they will know is when they walk the building and they see Aaron Ross's image on the wall, and they see Earl Thomas. You know what I mean? When they walk the halls and see all of the former first-round draft picks and award winners that Texas has had, Michael Huff, they'll know that was Dwayne Aina. That Dwayne Aina showed up in 2001, stayed through 2013. There was a massive amount of success in high-level players that he was largely, if not entirely, responsible for. So, he's a big deal. He's like if the thing is, like Kyle Flood hasn't even done any of the things that Aina did. I mean, Aina was creating first-round draft picks on an annual basis, All-Americans on an annual basis, and he did it for more than a decade. So when you look at, like, I pick out Kyle Flood because he's probably the best assistant coach on the roster, right?
Yes.
Even he hasn't started cranking out. We think Kelvin Banks will be a guy like that, but like hadn't happened yet. So, it's hard to put into words just how successful Dwayne Aina was in his first stint at Texas. That guy should be in the Texas Hall of Honor. And they made Texas in the history of the football program may never quite have an assistant coach that ever churns out more success than Dwayne Aina did during his time here. I mean, people forget the end where it wasn't as good as the beginning and the middle parts. And, Aina was on those teams that got Mac Brown fired. And the secondary tailed off a little bit, after Earl Thomas and some of the Aaron Williamses of the world leave from that 2009 to 2010 defense. It never quite was that good again, but he's a made man in this town. There's just no doubt about it.
And then, by the way, Jack Crum says DBU recruits will notice. Do you think recruits will notice, Catch?
People got to stop doing this.
I know.
It's an asset that he's back in the program, but we got to get realistic with what it is that we think is going to happen here. If Texas becomes DBU again anytime soon, it's because Terry Joseph and Blake Gideon did fantastic jobs. It won't be because Dwayne Aina is in town and is in the building. There's only so much that he can do. And, Texas fans are going to be ridiculous with this. There's just no amount of us telling them slow down is going to sink in. It is, I think it's a great move. And the fact that he's worked with Johnny Nansen on staff last year at Arizona as an analyst. He's an analyst now, guys. This is what he is. I think makes the program better. You're better for having Dwayne Aina in your program, but you have to understand the ways he makes you better. Turning Texas back into DBU, it's a little bit like the Brian Carrington thing back. Like no matter how much a dude has success, and Brian Carrington was like critical to recruiting at one point, he's still not going to win the day for you. You still have to lean on your frontline coaches. No matter how good your support staff is, it's still about the guys drawing the almost $1 million paychecks. Understand that about Terry Joseph and Blake Gideon. They're making more than $500,000 a year. That's not what Dwayne Aina is going to make. Like, understand that Aina is going to help, but he's not going to rebuild what he left behind. That's almost an impossibility.
I think you should record what you say and then hit play throughout the offseason and the rest of 2024. Because I get the feeling this won't be the first or last time that you say it.
And look, Dwayne Aina. The other thing about Aina, he's an awesome human being. He laughs a lot. He's got a gregarious smile. He's infectious in terms of his attitude. So he's a popular guy. I just, I wonder at what point the mainstream college football fan will eventually learn, the limits for which off-field personnel guys are responsible for winning because, I think Paul Chryst probably helped the Texas offense this year, but he's not the reason they won the Big 12 championship.
Yeah.
Now, I know, Texas had a really strong support staff and it helped make them good and better. But ultimately, it's the coaches on the field and the players on the field that determine and define everything. And, you're right. Blake, just take that snippet and have it ready for all parts of the year. I can assure you there will be Dwayne Aina videos in the offseason. You guys will make certain of that. Anwar, anything else?
No, that's it. I think we covered just about all bases.
We did. Look, I'll be back with Chad in less than 2 hours for House Divided. We got a new recruiting show later this afternoon. Football with Friends at 2. We've shuffled the deck. Blake, there it is. We changed the graphic on Monday to show Overreaction Monday today. Anwar will be back Tuesday through Friday, as usual, old-fashioned at 9 a.m. You can see the schedule right there. We've got it on our socials. Get notifications. In the event that you can't memorize this, the notifications will let you know when we're going live. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button, guys. Make sure that you're subscribed and notifications. For myself, for Anwar, who's back, baby. From Blake, the producer, who's been helping us in all the changes. We appreciate you guys sticking with us. It wasn't like we were on our deathbed or anything like that. Thank you for always being supportive, though. I guess that's what I meant to say. For myself and Anwar Richardson and all the guys over at orangebloods.com, thanks for watching Orange Bloods Live. We'll see you in like 2 hours.